welcome to the CG Pro podcast. If you like what you hear today, like and subscribe and follow us at becomecgpro.com. So today it gives me great pleasure to introduce Joy Lea. She and I have had worked together before, had the pleasure of working with Joy. We've known each other for a little while. Joy is an amazing artist who's come up through the ranks in games, working for some big games companies, transitioned into the world of film and straight into virtual production, and worked on some amazing projects like The Lion King, which we worked on together. And I will stop that there and say, Joy, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Totally, yeah, it's a pleasure. If there's anything else you want to talk about in terms of what you worked on, I know it was a very quick intro, but
So I was on games for a while, and I was pretty lucky that virtual production kind of started off as my pleasure in games started going down. So Lion King, where I met you, is actually the first movie I worked on, and then from then on afterwards, I went to work on the Avatar sequels right after that, and then I worked on. Sorry, I'm just pulling up all the things. I was on Rescue Rangers for a little bit with NPC. I was the CG art director at AR Wall, which did LED wall sort of technology development. And then I switched over to the art department side of things. So I became a member of the Art Directors Guild and worked on Samaritan, and now I'm on Lion King too.
cool.
So back in the world of lions.
Yes,
Full
very
circle,
lion
circle of
themed
life.
life.
Yes, exactly.
I'm sure that never gets old. Cool, yeah, it's great to have you. I know you've done a lot of things since we worked together and worked on some really cool stuff before that. Just going back to kind of your early days, there any things that inspired you to get into this crazy industry or industries in the first place?
Well, I was a huge gamer growing up, so it's one of those things where as a kid you just love something so much, but everyone tells you that you can't be a part of it or can't do it at all. I remember really liking art when I was in high school, and all of my art teachers were like, well, you can't really do that as a career unless you become an art teacher like us. So when I first went to college, my major was art education, and
Right.
I absolutely hated it. And I ended up going to like 3 or 4 different colleges, just jumping around different majors, different paths. Briefly into like fashion illustration, and then I did game design for a little bit, and then I pretty much ended up at the Noman School of Visual Effects for their modeling and texturing program, and did that for a couple of years, and went straight into games after that. Um, I worked on a silly game as my first one called PlayStation All Stars, which is basically like Smash Brothers except for PlayStation characters. And what was really cool about that job is that we got a bunch of art from a bunch of other game franchises that were all built in different engines and different styles and different parameters. And we had to basically take these assets and reconfigure them or have to rebuild them completely. But it was a really good opportunity for me as someone who's basically just out of school to see how a breadth of studios did things and compare and contrast. And I thought that was really lucky for me.
So there's a lot of variety in the very
Yeah,
beginning.
yeah, in the very
Right.
beginning. And
Yeah,
then,
cool. It's
sorry.
Go ahead.
And then from then on, I just ended up working on a bunch of different companies. Like I worked briefly in mobile games with Double Helix. I worked at a couple startups, which are always all over the place, but allows you to have like a bigger part in like innovating and trying new things and throwing spaghetti against the wall until you find things. And then I ended up my last job in games was at DICE, working on the Battlefield series. So it's going from small indie titles to finally working on a giant franchise with a huge amount of history and huge libraries to work from. And that was a whole other game, I think. And it also like jumping between all these studios just gave me the opportunity to work with a whole bunch of different game engines also. So being able to adapt between working with different processes and different workflows Um, I think that was really, really good for me, especially when coming from that into virtual production when everything's still kind of fresh and new and figuring things out.
Yeah, it was a really interesting moment in filmmaking history being on that movie, and it was welcoming in people from the games industry, people from the film world, people from the visual effects world,
Mhm.
three kind of fairly distinct cultures um, coming together and trying to figure out how to collaborate. So yeah, it's really really interesting to hear about how it got going. I think a lot of our listeners come from different backgrounds. Some people are probably really curious. Some people are already in the industry and curious to hear probably how it's going. But definitely people curious about how to get into the industry in the first place. And I know that's
Mm.
something which changes a lot over time. It's definitely changed since I got into the industry.
Mhm.
Um, do you have any kind of thoughts on today? Say somebody wanted to break
Ooh.
into the industry in into virtual production, for example.
I would say if you want to do exactly what I'm doing, which is virtual production in like an art department, just open Unreal and start making environments, start placing cameras, try to copy shots in films or sets in films that you really like and see how they built that. Make sure to pay a lot of attention to scale. Scale is extremely important, especially if you're trying to replicate something that exists in real life. But yeah, like when I was first in games, I was hired based on a portfolio. There's nothing else. I didn't need to show any degrees or know anyone in particular. It's just they look at you and they look at your portfolio, and then most game studios give you tests. And I think some virtual production places are also handing out tests to people. So if you get the opportunity to have the foot in the door of getting a test, then just do the best you can on that. Um,
Right. That's interesting. So virtual production companies are also doing borrowing from the games world and giving
yeah,
people tests.
yeah.
Right.
So, and yeah, just make sure you, I don't know, just study lighting really closely, studying texturing, especially with material definition and stuff like that. I think a lot of people that I see coming up that are making mistakes are making things that are easy to see, but for a beginner can be hard to suss out, if you know what I'm saying. And just really, really, really learn how to look at yourself and be your own critic when it comes to things.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a really good point. It's a really important skill to develop as an individual. And um, also, do you have any thoughts on finding mentors? You know, how that's always been an important thing for me to find other
Mm-hmm.
people who have kind of gone down the path. Sometimes it's a little hard to find those people, but
Yeah, I think it can be really hard. I can't say that I've really had a really strong mentor, but that just could be because basically when I was in games, I never ever saw a woman who was in a higher position than I was, ever. So every single role that I had, I felt like I had to perform the best I could in that role to be representative of that. It's like you become a representative when you're the only person doing something. Um,
yeah,
so I know a lot of people talk about having mentors and being able to like look up to someone and be like, I want to be that someday. Um, but I can't say that I've had that
right.
at all. So it's not very helpful in the whole finding a mentor sort of thing. But that's just how my experience has been.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So you've been more. It sounds like more responsible for forging your own path and
Yeah.
growing your own strength.
Hmm. And I say my path is atypical because of it, but because of that, I've learned a huge breadth of things.
Yeah, you've worked in multiple different industries and
Mm.
technologies, and so going back to your games days, it must have been amazing to be an avid gamer and then get to work on some of the projects. You
Yeah.
probably played the games before you
Hmm.
actually got to work on them.
No, absolutely. But the thing about joining games is that you don't have time to play games anymore once you're in
Yeah,
games, pretty much. I mean, it's the same with film. You don't have as much time. Like these industries in general, especially all these passion-based industries, I call them, you tend to kind of lose all of your time and energy into it. Because even when you're not working, you're always still thinking about it. You're always still doing the art. You're still looking in the world a certain way. And you tend to lose time to actually enjoy things. I think more so now I've been able to play games though, since the past couple of years that things have slowed down, and being able to work from home and everything has definitely helped with time management. But then again, you never really leave your job. Then you're always
Right.
there.
You live
Yeah.
in your office, literally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, my cat is usually very shy, but he is here to support me.
Very cool.
Mm.
Everybody needs one of those, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Talking about working from home, seeing as you brought it up, how has that been different in working from home versus working in a studio, from your experience?
It depends on. I think it really depends on what level you're at and what sort of project it is. I've really personally enjoyed working from home these past couple of years because I like the flexibility, and I feel like with being able to work from home, you can hire artists from all over the world and get all these sort of perspectives on things. And I think for especially artistic developments, that is super cool and super useful. And I feel like there's been an onflow of creativity because of that. But when I think back to me starting on Lion King and us working together and just being able to sit together and kind of overhear things that were going on, overhear questions that would need to be answered, and be like, oh, I can help with that. Oh, well, I can have a solution for that. Oh, let me try and help you work out this problem. That doesn't happen as much when you're working from home.
Right.
Yeah, because you can be on Slack and someone can directly ask you a question on Slack. But
Yeah.
if they don't think to ask, they could be struggling with a problem for longer than they can. Or if you are like a mid-level artist that knows a lot, but no one's ever asking you anything, then it can be really hard to like show your worth a bit. So I think at that level, it can be difficult.
That makes sense. Yeah, and probably different depending on where you're at with your career.
Mhm.
If you're starting out versus being a bit further on, it's probably easier to be. Speaking from my own opinion, I think it's probably easier being a bit more experienced and being able to draw on that as if you're starting out.
Absolutely.
Do you have any thoughts on how people could kind of combat that if they're new to the game, and how they could kind of benefit from some of the things that we did, but working in person?
I don't know. I would suggest if as soon as in studio jobs open again, get inside a studio. Or I guess if you're a junior and you're stuck in home and everyone's still stuck at home, then just don't be shy. Just
Right.
I don't know, spray gun out questions to people. Just don't be afraid to contact someone if you're struggling, or get on a video call. I think video calls help a lot versus messages also.
Yeah.
And yeah, it'd be really, really difficult if you're a junior artist at home and not wanting to reach out. I think that would probably be the hardest position to be in right now.
Yeah. So as you said, it sounds like being more vocal. If you kind of know that that's you, that you're more on the junior side and you're working from home, just being more vocal and being more outgoing, trying to grow that skill. Which is a skill like any other.
Yeah. I don't know, it can be hard online sometimes, though. I mean, everything can be, with chatting especially, everything can be misinterpreted. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot to be said for being in front of a person because so much communication is non-verbal, and we're missing a lot of that going through Slack and Telegram and whatever digital channels. It's absolutely rife with misinterpretation. And it's important to be aware of that, I guess, and try and everyone has a balance with Zoom and Zoom meetings and Zoom fatigue, but it does have a lot of value to actually get your team together in person and make sure video's on. And it sounds like that's more important than ever.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's why people are trying to combat it with the metaverse sort of stuff. Trying to have an avatar thing going on, but I think that we'll have a long way to go to actually capture humans in a sense about how we interact. So
Well, seeing as you brought that buzzword up, Dean, what are your thoughts on that, on the metaverse
On the metaverse.
as
Well,
an
the cool
idea?
thing with the metaverse is that they want all objects to become NFTs and be transferable between, like in a Web3 sort of, what's the word for it, where everything can be used by everything, like cross compatibility between all systems, because things are owned by as an asset that you could switch between this metaverse, that metaverse, all that sort of thing.
Right.
I think that has
Some
a very,
standards.
very long way to go. I think with like app development, that's gone a lot further with different programs being able to join on different decentralized applications and stuff like that. That's, but I think is in terms of creating art assets and being able to switch that between different worlds and being able to have ownership over that in a decentralized way, which is hopefully the where we're going, and not the Facebook metaverse, um, but the actual decentralized metaverse. That would be interesting. I think that has a very, very long way to go. Because like all game engines essentially work the same way ish, but not
Yeah.
quite together. You can't put like a Unity object straight into Unreal. Like you can't do a zebra sculpt and put it straight into Unity, or like you can't. There's so many hoops you have to go through for all these cross compatibility for everything. Um, the way that shaders work in different networks, the way different programs can handle different loads of like texture count and poly count and everything. It's like there has to be an agreement of like how to do things first before you can truly have something that's a metaverse that everyone can work and grow in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's working on the standards, because there's not been
Yeah, there's no
standards
standard.
particularly. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and there's obviously some agreed upon standards like JPEG and PNG. Those are things that we understand.
Yeah.
FTX has been the kind of favorite geometry
Yeah.
swapping mechanism, but now there's
Mm-hmm.
some new technologies which, well, we actually used USD to mention
Yeah.
one that's trying to
USDs.
crack that problem. Probably
Mm-hmm.
a little too early on the Lion King,
Mm-hmm. Oh god, that was a
but
mess.
yeah, I remember. But it was good to try it. Having the
Yeah.
daring to actually give it a go. Some people had to be on that bleeding edge. It was difficult being on it for sure, but now
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of maturing. Do you guys in your experience, your work since, have you been exploring the progression of USD, or some, I guess, Omniverse, which is an extension of USD, being able to
Mm-hmm.
connect things together in maybe like a metaverse kind of way, although nobody gets to say what the metaverse is. I
Yeah.
think that's my take on it. No one gets to
Yeah.
do that.
I think I don't know. It's an interesting question because I'm currently not on the VFX side of it right now. I'm purely art department, so I don't have to worry about what happens to my assets once it leaves
Oh, cool.
how the production designer is viewing it and goes onto the movie side of it. So I don't know how their technology is developing since then, since the package we had to work with.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of companies are trying to figure out exactly that bridge um, between Unreal or Unity and whatever post processing. These pipelines that all these big companies have, like NPC, DNIG, Framestore. They all have their pipeline that they have for posts that's very, very specific to them,
Yeah.
and they're all trying to figure out what that transition is or how to make that as seamless as possible. So
Yeah, it makes sense, and it's emergent. It's kind of new.
mhm.
The Omniverse is an idea I think is really interesting from NVIDIA, trying to build on top of USD and allow,
Yeah.
but basically a pipeline that isn't really a pipeline. It's more of a concurrent kind of flat structure where people can
Mhm.
work on things at the same time, as opposed to
Yeah.
taking something and feeding it further down the pipe.
Mhm.
It's sort of, to me, it feels like it becomes a like work version of the metaverse almost immediately, in that sense of being able to, because I think there's different applications for the metaverse. You could be in it socially, you can be in it to experience events that we would have done in the physical
Mhm.
world. You can do shows or conferences, or
Yeah.
but there's also the working context for me, which is, I think, the most practical one I feel that it would be useful for straight away is actually working together, and maybe not like people might imagine that everyone's, or maybe Facebook imagines that everyone's going to be in a headset 24 hours a day. I know that we know that, having worked on things like The Lion King, people don't want to spend very long in a headset. It's not comfortable. It's not necessary in a lot of cases. But the underlying part of it, where things actually connect together, I think is really interesting in a work sense. If we can become more connected, if you can connect the bits of the process together, things like remote session sync in Unreal being an example, like that's effectively hanging out in a content creation tool, which is kind of a metaverse-like experience in a way.
And if you expand that, and where everyone's just going to be filming movies in a metaverse, where there's already like predetermined places you can go to. I can teleport over to Utah and beautiful rock structures and set up a film crew there. Everyone's in headsets or on their screens.
Yeah.
And it's all decentralized. That would be really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like it's coming. It feels like it's happening a bit, but definitely, as you said, I think a long way to go, and it's an interesting, it's hard, one of those things that's like hard to label something like virtual production or the metaverse, but in trying to, I think it feels like a kind of a convenient label to describe an idea, and that's important, I think, even though there's a lot of misconception around metaverse and virtual production. Maybe we can ask you about virtual production then as another idea, what that means to you.
Well, virtual production, the way that I've been currently working on it, is making real-time environments for set scouting, or building sets that wouldn't exist, or even building sets that will exist. And one of the first jobs I did on the art department side of virtual production was making sets for Samaritan, where we actually had a space that was our warehouse that was to scale in Unreal, and trying to figure out how to configure a street that they're going to build in that set space. So just being able to have that live, it's the same as a set builder would have it, but with the opportunity to actually have the director go in with a headset and look around and change lighting and move buildings, make the building or the road skinnier or wider, make this shot larger so we get this certain silhouette for certain shots, and being able to put a camera in there and see what that will look like, and being able to make all those decisions before actually going in and making that set. That was really interesting to me. And that is pure art department. It doesn't have to do with actually going in there and filming that. It's just all the setup. It's all traditionally like set building, but just a newer way to do it and with more tools.
So basically drafting, but you're just drafting in 3D in a real-time engine.
Yeah, and being able to determine materials, determine reflections, all that stuff comes with it. So, and I feel like when people think about virtual production, they think about an LED wall on stage, and that's their view of virtual production. That's their only view of virtual production, and that, I'd say, is one of the rarest, most expensive cases of virtual production.
Yes.
I think that when people only think of it that way, they're not thinking wide enough. To have an LED wall on stage with a set in front of it and doing those camera stuff can look really fancy in like a behind the scenes sort of video, but you're extremely limited on your lighting choices, you're extremely limited on your set size, you're extremely limited on costs. It can be really, really, really expensive to run that. But there's so many things about virtual production that are not expensive. Figuring out sets, figuring out cameras, figuring out lighting, like all of that stuff can be done at home and not without a crew out there trying to catch a sunset every night. So
yeah, it's so what you were describing as being kind of tech viz, essentially, where you're pre-vising a physical build of a shoot, which really helps streamline the process for creating it, and also makes it really iterable, and you don't have to do that iteration with physical expensive things. You can do it virtually, make all your decisions, and then just basically render it into real life once you're done. So there's a lot less kind of discovery once you've done it. once you're building it on stage.
Mhm.
And then sounds like what you're saying. The other sides to virtual production is, you know, demystifying it and making people more aware that it's something that everybody can use.
Yeah,
Everybody can
absolutely.
do themselves. You
Hmm.
don't need a studio, a company, a big space, lots of
No,
equipment. Something you
no,
actually
you
do
can
as an
just
individual.
yeah, you can. Well, that's what we did in the Unreal Fellowship. Is we built little sets, built little stories. We put a camera in there. We ran out the cameras, edited it, all that stuff in Unreal, and making our own films. It's filmmaking, and you could just do that. I mean, the Unreal Marketplace is so much free stuff, and more free
Yeah,
stuff every single month. That you could just take it all and keep it all and make your own giant library over time and build stuff. Like you don't even have to make assets from scratch anymore at this point. Well, for things specifically, or if you're trying to match something specifically, yes, you do. But for the most part, if you just want to mess around with it and play with it and build sets, it's all already there for you.
right. Which is great. We have a lot of students that come through the school that come from the filmmaking side. They don't have the 3D background, and it's amazing that they can leverage pre-built things. They don't have to learn how to 3D model necessarily to be able to rough a set, even to just sketch an idea, and potentially
Mhm.
even take it a lot further than that. So yeah, my experience is definitely shortened the period of time that people need to learn, to people need to train to be able to be useful. And we're seeing DPs and directors jumping on the box, and
Mhm.
within a few weeks with a fellowship kind of length of an experience, be able to be useful and be, you know, get value out of it, and not take 2 years to learn Maya, like
Mhm.
several weeks to learn Unreal, and still find it really useful for their process.
Mhm. Yeah. I saw a question about specifically bashing marketplace kits together.
Oh,
Um,
sure. Yeah.
yeah, well, one thing you really have to watch out for is scale of everything, because marketplace sometimes does a good job where people tend to build things for real world scale, where you can place a human right in, everything makes sense, but not everything, and sometimes things get really really wonky. And sometimes stylized sets or sets with a little bit of stylization where things are a little bit thicker, a little bit taller, look really realistic when you're seeing them all together as a set, but when you're placing them next to other objects, if you're combining kits, then it can look a little rough. What I would learn if you're doing marketplace sort of bashing, I would just learn to be really, really critical of everything you're looking at and learn shaders really well, because all these kits will usually come with their own master shader of the way they're setting up their shaders. And sometimes it has a metallic map, sometimes it's a spec map. Sometimes things are done correctly, some things are done in a stylized sort of way, sometimes things have emissive glows all over them, and you should be able to know how to suss it out and turn things on and off, and you're looking at two rocks from two different kits together and see how they're looking slightly different, you should be able to dig into the shaders and find out why that is. I think that's really,
Right.
really important.
So extending your skills beyond kit bashing, actually learning how the engine works, being
Hmm.
able to tailor those assets, even
Yeah.
if you're just nudging them into shape.
Yeah, but you can
Learning how
learn
to do
a
that.
ton by downloading these things and digging into like really complex shaders and going down another level, down another level. How does this material function work? Oh, what is this calling for? Oh, you should go look at this node. Oh, just look it up in the help guide and see what exactly that does. And they'll usually show examples and try playing around with all the sliders and see exactly what everything it does. Make sure to turn off your lighting and see how everything looks in diffuse and see if those colors and saturation values are coming together and not being tricked by some weird spec somewhere. Um, Definitely, that's a really good tip is when you're looking at things and you're seeing something wrong, go through all the channels of being like, okay, how does this look with diffuse lighting only? How does this look like with all the normal max on? Oh, that's where the problem is. Okay, where can I find that?
Right.
A lot of this is problem solving, and it can be really fun. I think
Yeah.
I find a lot of fun doing that sort of thing. I'm trying to figure out why things are wrong and how to fix them.
I feel the same way. Basically, and I feel it's somewhat similar on the aesthetic side and the technical side, because they're both problem solving. The aesthetic side, you're problem solving the visual, and trying to figure out how is that working, how is it working, how it's not, and how do you fix that. And same on the technical side, you're problem solving in a different way, and both are both very creative, I think, in that sense. We had another question that came in. Just having a look here. So, somebody asked what programs do you use in the virtual art department, and what does the job kind of look like?
Yeah, currently I'm doing stuff in Unreal. I have worked on departments using Unity as well. Usually it's Maya with Substance Painter, ZBrush sometimes. And that sort of pipeline where if you make an asset from scratch, you model in Maya, do a high-res sculpt in ZBrush, take them both in the Substance Painter and bake high to low, and then texture it all in Substance Painter and spit out the Substance Painter has like a automated Unreal spit out, so you get your textures in there and plug it into Unreal. We do have our set of master shaders in our current project, so if you are starting a new project, I would set up your master shaders for different things that you would need, like different transparency, emissive, or we have like camera-facing cards and stuff like that. So
right,
yeah.
So build yourself a little toolkit before you get going. Yeah, good advice. Any Blender coming in?
Not personally. I'm interested in it. But the thing is, I know Maya really, really, really well, because that's what I've used my entire career, and that's what we mostly learned in school. So I think it depends on what program you grow up with or learn with. It's gonna be how your handwriting is. I know all my finger positions in Maya and all my little hotkeys and everything. I know how to exactly do everything. So being able to switch that in your brain to a different program, it was hard enough to go from Maya to ZBrush and back and forth, and being able to switch your brain. So I don't want to. I need to learn Blender because everyone's using Blender, but I have not found the time to do that yet.
Yeah, it definitely takes. I'm going through the same thing. I've been trying to chip away at it for a while and converting the workflow. It definitely takes time when, like you said, you've got your muscle memory kind of bound into a certain tool. I was just curious because I see a lot more use of Blender these days, and I guess the big question's been around, like, Blender's been a hobbyist tool primarily for a long time, and now it's being taken quite seriously, and I see studios starting to allow the use of it. They're maybe feeding the result of it back into the pipeline, but I was just curious if you're seeing people around you in the world of virtual production being able to use Blender as an option, or if it's like
I mean, whatever you can
really
model out. If you need to model something, then use a modeling program. I don't think it matters which modeling program you use as long as you get an FBX out of it. So some people in like the 2D side of art departments have been using Blender just to set up shots, get a quick perspective for paint over, quick lighting, that sort of thing. So, and I think more and more guys in our department are diving into those packages when they haven't done 3D before. So
right, so it's one to watch, but definitely still, and I guess some pipelines will kind of push you into that way of the Maya way of working if their tools are built around Maya.
So this is a specific pipeline. I think especially in VFX when you're on a large company and everything is built to Maya. Like when I was at Lightstorm, everything was done in Maya because it's all linked up to Weta's Gazebo system, their own world type system. So you couldn't really not work in Maya at all. So
it's an interesting question for me because I see a lot of people coming in to the industry, new people coming into the industry, and obviously the old guard has been all Maya, and now it's starting to change a little bit. People really often ask that question: what tools should I learn? What software should I learn? Should I learn Maya? Should I learn Blender? And my answer to that has always been, go ask the people that are doing the work, find out what they're using, and then go learn that. And that's how I started with my visual effects career. So I realized I had to learn Maya because at that point everybody was using it, and now it's like evolving a bit, and there's a bit more choice of using the tool that you're comfortable with, pipeline dependent. I think it's just a really interesting time that some of these tools, especially free tools that are free to use, but also free to use to learn on, it really helps people be able to
absolutely. It makes it more available to everyone. Like Blender and Unreal, and we just be able to dive right in without paying a cent, really. I mean, you need a computer, also, obviously, and that can be the biggest cost. And a lot of people don't have access to that, so I shouldn't say it's free, but it helps a hurdle. But yeah, I would say on my current job, it wouldn't matter if I was using Blender.
Right.
Because we don't exchange things in Maya at all. It all goes through Unreal anyway. So whatever can get you to Unreal, then.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. That's really, really useful to hear that. I think as people are trying to figure out, it's a lot to, as you said, learn another program. If you're used to Blender, it sounds like, and you know that really well. It sounds like there is an opportunity to jump in without necessarily having to learn Maya. Maybe a little different in a visual effects pipeline.
Yeah, I think for a visual effects company, you'd probably still have to learn Maya. But since I am not part of the VFX company anymore, then it's just doing the art side of it.
Right.
Yeah, I saw a question asking if I was part of the VAD or the standard art department on Samaritan. It was the art department. They didn't have a separate VAD, so it's all under the production designer. That one.
Right. That was for Samaritan.
Yeah, that's for Samaritan. I saw the question pop through. And then another question about scale. Do I ever scale purchase objects? Yeah, I mean, I've changed. It's not just about like this chair can be bigger or smaller. It's about how the joints are in relation to each other, in relation to a hand. Like I fixed a lot of marketplace assets before that seem like they're the right size, but it's definitely has to do with like thicknesses and relationships and being able to see how that is realistic or not. A lot of building kits have to have like really cool storefronts, but all the beams are a little bit too wide and the wood is wider than it would be in real life. So you can kind of tell that something's off. It looks not realistic in that sort of sense. So I would definitely take assets. You could put them, there's measuring tools in Unreal you can get and measure things and see how that actually measures up with something next to you. Carry a tape measure around, measure a brick if you're doing a brick wall. I think especially bricks can really determine scale in any sort of scene. Just measure a brick and make sure your bricks are the right size. It's stuff like that. And once all that fits together, you can make something that feels really cohesive and it's very satisfying.
Right. And how do you adjust them if you've downloaded something from the marketplace? How do you go
I would
about
bring it into Maya, export it out, bring it into Maya. You get all your LEDs and everything. Too, so you can kind of adjust everything so it all kind of fits together.
Right. So you can bring an FBX out, make some adjustments, fire it back into Unreal, replace it, re-import it, whatever.
Yeah, I re-imported it and replace everything.
Cool.
Unreal makes it really easy like that. We just like replace. It's not a find and replace. It just automatically just like places it all in there, which is really great. So.
Very cool. Somebody's asking if you're a modeler and you want to become part of the virtual art department, what new skills should you focus on?
Just learn how to get things in and out of game engines. If you're a modeler, if you're a VFX modeling house or modeling, if you're modeling for a VFX house and you're doing the super high res final frame sort of thing, just learn how to bake things down really well. People like when Unreal 5 becomes a thing that everyone uses, people are not going to care so much about UDIMs and everything like that. But for now, I would try to put all your textures on a single map. Learn about how to separate your different like red, green, blue channels, be able to use that for the roughness, metallic, spec map, stuff like that. And really learn how to squish things down to a format that uses as little texture space as possible. Right. So can look at, I would look at guides for making game assets, like really old school guides for making like making game kits. You can search for them outside, like how to make what's the word for it? Like a kit of parts that you could build a game level out of, where someone takes a 1K texture and is able to pull out enough textures for like 10 different walls by using different strips that can tile a certain way, and being able
Right.
to use their normal maps a certain way or your displacement maps a certain way in order to get a whole bunch of different results from the same thing. Going back in time to actually learn how they did it back then will help you a lot when figuring out how to make a model efficient. It's like learning how to do it a really, really hard way in order to do it the easier way now. Because it is easier now than it was back then. But I think a lot of that knowledge is super useful for people to know now.
Right. So essentially, you're talking about optimization, basically.
Optimization.
Yeah.
Yeah. Learn optimization, learn how to bake things down, learn how to lay out a UV map properly. I'm sure a lot of that is known things, but
I
like
think
when
it's really
I
helpful
got
for people to
VFX
understand.
assets, what?
I think it's very helpful for you to
Yeah,
go through it, definitely.
yeah, yeah. Because I feel like when I've gotten VFX assets and had to bring them down to a game engine, those are the steps I go through. They have it all laid out in this giant UDIM, put it down in one map, duplicate things that don't need to be that like it's like wings on an airplane. You just need one of them, so you got rid of the other one. Make sure it's using the same texture map. It's stuff like that. Being able to conserve texture space is a huge one, and conserve geometry.
Right. Being efficient.
Yes.
And it's interesting that you brought Unreal 5 up because I think, excuse me, I think that there's a lot of perception out there that it's going to get rid of all of that, the need to do all of that work. What's your take on that?
I
As
don't
much as
think
you know.
so.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe. I played with it a little bit. So I have the demo and I've played with it for maybe 4 hours tops, and I made it crash a couple times. I played just seeing how much geometry I could load into it.
Stress testing
Um,
it, yeah.
um, I I think like the thing about Unreal 5 is that to say that it is exactly what it says, that you can bring in all this geometry, all of the geometry, and you can bring in all the texture space, you can bring in all the lighting, it's still not gonna take away the art part of it. Like you're still gonna have to learn scale, you're still gonna have to learn shaders. You can bring in all the texture space you want, but if your metallic value is wrong, it's still not gonna be wrong. If you don't know how to make a diffuse map that works correctly with the lighting could be perfect, but if your shader maps aren't working correctly, it's not going to look perfect. So I would say it will save time for if I don't have to make assets optimized anymore. I don't have to worry about making that a director won't get sick when it's a VR headset anymore if I put in too much geometry. But I think art is still really, really important, and that will never change.
Right. So the fundamentals are
Yeah.
going to be exactly the same, but the
Mhm.
process will change a little bit. And
Yeah.
it sounded like you feel I feel this way too. Even though that you can throw your ZBrush sculpts straight in the engine, technically, does that mean that you should if you're going to end up with huge amounts of on disk? It's like
Oh
becomes more
yeah,
of a
on
disk
disc
problem than a
especially. I
memory
think that's the
problem.
problem they're having that now with all the
Yeah.
demos that are doing on Unreal 5 and all the companies that are trying to build a game or build a cute little video, that sort of thing. Is that I mean 8K textures, 16K textures, passing that back and forth with everyone working from home. That's
Hmm.
something that's gonna have to get a lot better.
Right.
All that memory
The
is a
bandwidth,
lot.
yeah, the bandwidth
Yeah,
problem and the storage problem is not
yeah.
maybe a memory problem so much anymore, but
Mhm.
those other things, it's pushed it into another area. So
Yeah.
it seems like, and I feel this way too, like optimization isn't something that you should just ignore. And we go through this in the school a bunch. Should not something you should ignore because Unreal
Mhm.
5 is going to take all that half of the job away from you. It's still important to know about it, and we will see, I guess, how it evolves as Unreal 5 gets used more.
Mhm.
But yeah, really, it's really interesting to me to discuss kind of the future of where the stuff's going because we're in this big point of transition where some of these
Mhm.
new technologies that are emerging in real time, things we haven't had before, like ray tracing and huge amounts of geometry and real time dynamic indirect lighting and those kinds of
Yeah.
things that
I remember for my
they're
first
new.
couple games, I had to cut in the shadows into the geometry for the background. and do
Yes, you had to
with the
model them in.
vertex point shading. What?
You had to model them in, model your
Yes, model them
shadows.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and then color them vertex points because I couldn't afford a texture space, so I had to actually color the vertexes. That was Blue Point Engine.
Wow.
That was
Yeah,
rough.
it's exciting to be able to get rid of some of it. To me, and things like UV mapping and optimization and that kind of stuff is you want to focus on the art more. And I think that some of these
Yeah.
tools are helping us to be able to focus on the art more. But
Mhm.
still, it seems like for at least the next while, it will be important um, to keep focusing on optimization and keep that. So that going back to the person's question about the skills to learn trying to get into this world, it sounds like that's still a very important thing.
I think it is, and I think like the more for learning that sort of thing, like learning optimization or learning how levels are built or sets are built or anything, just you can learn so much by just taking other people's work or other people's levels or marketplace sets. There's tons of them available online. They're not even just the marketplace ones. You look for people's Unreal projects, take them, pull them apart, see how they do things, see how things look together, see where they put up cameras, see how they do their lighting, and especially if you do that with game levels where people are actually running like a real time game through it and seeing how they're setting up their spawn points and run cycles and things like that. That's all really, really, really useful. And I think, especially as virtual production is moving forward, a lot of that knowledge, how things used to be done,
Right.
should be incorporated in. I feel like sometimes VFX houses approach virtual production in a game engine as trying to jam it into their pipeline. Like, we do things
Mm.
a certain way, so we need to fit our way of doing things into this thing that's not how we do things at all.
Right.
And I think that is the wrong approach. Game studios have been doing beautiful work for decades, decades. All the game trailers that you see coming out every year are all in engine and beautiful and look like stunning. And when people are making like real time environments and doing little trailers that are for movie production, they're still not looking at what game trailers have already done and what game artists have already done. I think there's a huge disconnect there. It's like, oh, we were able to do this without looking at what other people have been able to do just because it's a different industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So pay attention to
Yes.
the pedigree that comes from games, and that was definitely that was clear on Lion King when we our worlds collided. You coming from
Mm.
games, me coming from film visual effects, and
Mm.
there was so much that we had to learn from you guys coming in from games. You've
Mhm.
already gone down this road, and the same the other way around, and in being able to it was a really cool experience being able to bring those two things together and trying to get them to meld together, I guess, is the challenge. How do you get those two cultures to blend together and work together and look for the value in each other? And
Mhm.
yeah, sometimes it can be a little bit of a fight, but when it does work, it's quite a
Yeah,
it's a
as long as you're willing to
creativity
learn from
happens.
each other. I mean, games have a lot to learn from like film as well as the cinematography wise, or
Mm.
the way they build sets a certain way, framing things for a certain angle of camera versus games, right? They make everything that sort of thing. So, um,
There's another question I can see come in that is in what ways does the virtual art department collaborate with the camera department compared to how it works in traditional production?
the camera department, I don't personally work with the camera department. I did a little bit at Lightstorm when we were building our set for virtual cameras there, because that was through James Cameron developed his system for looking at things in a virtual camera where he has his cameraman being able to, he basically has cameramen all set up around a virtual set where there's a whole bunch of green screen volumes that people were mocapped on. And instead of VR goggles, which he hated, he had a bunch of screens
Mm.
and watched all the camera stuff from that way. And that's
Right.
the only interaction I personally have with camera departments.
I guess there was a bit on Lion King too. In being in the VAD, we were slightly more connected to stage, slightly
Oh yeah, yeah.
slightly more than maybe the art department. Even
Mhm.
the art department there was relatively connected to the stage too, but it had to go through us to go to make it run on
Mhm.
stage. It's interesting. Maybe do you guys get involved in the scouts directly, or are you more kind of feeding the stuff through to the scout?
Um, yeah, people that are not, because I'm working from home. There are people on stage that are part of our team that are involved with the scouts directly,
Right.
that are able there to troubleshoot or help with lighting, help with moving rocks around for certain things. That sort of thing is usually the help that comes with scouts. But everything's kind of predetermined when we send things off. We send them off with little kits of like rocks and plants and things in the area that they need to move around, different lighting conditions they could play with. So I am an 800 senior illustrator. That last question.
Okay, cool.
800 art director. 800
Right.
under art directors guild.
Cool. Yeah, it's
So,
interesting to know how these various departments are fitting together, and there's sometimes,
mhm.
as we were saying, the virtual art department on The Lion King was with a vendor, it was with
Yes.
NPC, and then there was also the art department, and we worked together to feed things through to stage. And in some cases, it sounds like that's not the case. In your case, the art department is the virtual art department. It's all
Yes.
one thing, which makes sense. Probably a lot smoother that way.
And I think
Um,
like even a lot of art departments now are having, even if there is a separate virtual art department that is under a vendor, they do have their own people in the art department under the production designer, so there can be that bridge. Or
right.
even like what I did for Samaritan, where they didn't have a virtual art department at all. It was just us trying to build a set. So I think there's a lot of room in art departments for virtual art department people.
Do you have a sense of what they would be called if they're on the art department side? Are they still called a virtual art department? Are they called the art department? Is there any kind of conversation about like what it should be called?
I would just like to be called the art department. Just be an
Yeah.
real artist in the art department, personally.
Right.
I think when it transitions into virtual art department when you're actually scouting and shooting in it. So there are plenty of projects where you don't scout and shoot in a virtual world, but they still build things virtually. So
Okay. Another question I had, seeing as you mentioned earlier on the fellowship experience, can you tell us briefly what that was like? What it was like to
it's really, really
work on the fellowship?
intense. It was really intense because I was moving to London at the time. At the same time, I was doing the fellowship, but I think it was really interesting because a lot of people. It was a huge range of people in our fellowship, and as people that were directors or cinematographers or people that were heavily into VFX or VFX soups. And I was coming as a person that worked a little bit in film but had a ton of game experience. So I already knew game engines and Unreal really well. So a lot of the classes were a mix of teaching Unreal and all the basics of like how assets are set up and how to organize things and how to bring things in. And a lot of it was also camera work and bringing in animations and things on how to build a film inside of Unreal, which I thought was really interesting. It was an interesting approach because I think virtual production is a huge, wide range of things under the virtual production umbrella. And what they did with the fellowship is it is basically a filmmaking in virtual production fellowship because it's like what's the term? Like soup to nuts, like the beginning to end of making a film and how to make your film independently. And this is the wide range of things you need to know in order to get the film. Um, so for me, I was really uncomfortable with animation in general and being able to take mocap and blend things together. And um, that was a real struggle, and that was a lot of the project. But there's some guys in the program that are coming from a mocap world, so that was perfect for them. They just had to learn how to use Unreal, learn how to light things, and learn how to build environments. So it was really interesting. Everyone got something out of it, I think.
Right. And it was quite short in a way. It was only 5 or 6 weeks. But what was your experience of being able to watch? I know you probably knew Unreal a little bit going into it, but for other people coming from zero to going through 5 weeks worth of training.
Hmm.
What did you see from people picking it up from scratch, I guess?
I think I don't know. I had 10 years of experience in Unreal before going in,
Yeah.
and so I think it was way more intense for them because it is a huge download of information. If you don't know how assets are set up, or if you don't know what, and some things you don't really need to know for specific projects, but it is a lot of info. It is a lot. I think there is a huge learning curve for it. Um, there is and there isn't. It's a small learning curve in order to just get started and build something, but it's a huge learning curve for knowing how to fix things. I think being able to
Right.
get under the engine and find out why things are the way they are. And it's just the intensity of classes. I mean, it was I have my old schedule for it somewhere. I think it was like 6 hours a day
Right.
or something. Some of them were like labs where you just sit in there and ask questions, but it was like early in the morning, get up, 3 hours of classes, do this homework for the class, start to work on your little short film. Uh, so I can imagine if I didn't know Unreal at all, that would be really overwhelming.
Right.
And it's really fast. So
But people did go into it with no experience and
yeah,
come out with a
absolutely.
short film.
Yeah.
It's comparing that to, say, if it where people did previs before in maybe some game engines, but mostly kind of doing it in Maya and or Motion Builder, which would take a lot longer to learn how to do anything in those environments.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, at least Unreal, if you play games at all, it's WASD to move around, and that's pretty intuitive. And drag and drop for a lot of the assets, which is not Maya at all.
Yeah, every vertex you have to fight for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Another quick question for a director preparing to collaborate with a virtual art department lead. What advice would you offer in terms of how a director could be best prepared?
For a director, if you're not used to seeing things in virtual production, just be really communicative. I mean, your lead should tell you what can and cannot be changed as far as your expectations when you're looking at a set, because sometimes when a director is looking at a set in virtual production, they can be like, wow, this room is way too small. It's all ruined. We can't shoot anything in here. But that's actually really, it's a stupid example, but that's a super easy thing to fix. And some things that could be things that would be really difficult to change in the real world are like nothing in a virtual production world. And so they should be really open with you if it can and can't be fixed. And yeah, just keep an open mind. If you get dizzy in the VR headset, make sure to tell them because they could probably fix it. Take it off. Make sure they have a good lighter because lighting can change a lot. A lot of your experience in there, and yeah, I don't think there's any other advice.
Right. So yeah, good communication.
Good communication.
Being prepared, exploring what is capable of yourself a bit, having a good lighter. Really some really great advice there for how to get ready for shoots. But in general, sounds like just get some knowledge, get just enough knowledge if you're a director of how it works. Don't just rely on all completely on somebody telling you how it works. Like it sounds like it'd be quite empowering to learn as a director, actually learn a bit about the engine, learn a bit about the workflow, and that could be quite empowering for them. Cool. I don't know if this is another question that's coming in. Anyway, yeah, I'm not sure, but yeah, I think we have got to the hour, so I just wanted to say thank you very much, Joy, for being here with us. Yeah, it's a pleasure. Yeah, thanks for joining us and sharing all of that great information and your experience in this area. Is there anywhere that people can find out more about you or follow your work? Or
no, I don't really post anything.
That's okay.
You can find me on LinkedIn probably. I check it once every couple weeks, and it's usually how people contact me if they need to for like job sort of things.
Yeah.
But that's about it.
Cool. Yeah, no, I'm terrible with sharing things on Instagram or ArtStation personally. If my reel needs updating as well. So yeah, no, it's all good. Just if you had any stuff to show off, then we can share it with the.
Someday I'll get on that whole sharing things.
I keep saying that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for being with us, Joy. We had a great session here today. Thanks to all our listeners for being here and engaging and asking great questions. We're here with Joy Lea from the Virtual Art Department, or the Art Department I should say, talking about Art Department and virtual production. For CG Pro, you can follow us on our YouTube channel, Become CG Pro, our website, becomecgpro.com. We have a free Facebook community that is becoming a CG Pro on Facebook. Our next podcast is William Fauché in 2 weeks' time, so look forward to that. I'm definitely looking forward to that one as well. And yeah, thank you all very much for being here.
Thanks.